In this video I'm going to take a look at this piece of vintage technology called a triplecorder. Now the suggestion for this video came from a viewer who'd seen this for sale on eBay and he thought it was right up my street, and he was right, so I imported one from the US. Now the triplecorder was made by a company called Answer Manufacturer in Japan. The model number, as you see there, is ATR102, and it's a radio, a phonograph and a tape recorder all in one. Now I got this in a box with some packing material, included in which was this bag. Now I've had some strange things in packing material before, including socks for example, so I thought well maybe someone's just shoved a handbag in there to pad it out a bit, but no, this is part of the kit. This is the carrying case for the triplecorder. In here we've got the instruction booklet and also the tone arm for the phonograph, and then in the other side we've got the platter for the phonograph, and also down in the bottom of there is a 45 RPM adapter which I discovered was in there later on. Anyway, let's go back to the box and get the triplecorder out. It's been in here since sometime, I think in the 1960s, but we'll go into that in a bit more detail later on. We've got the batteries in here, which are 3 D cells. They're branded Novell, but below that it says it's part of Fuji Electrochemical Co Limited. They're leak proof and it looks like they've lived up to that claim because they haven't leaked all over the box, although there'll be no use now. Putting the triplecorder to one side, the other things inside the case are an aerial, that's for the AM radio. We've got a microphone because as well as a tape player it's a tape recorder and a phonograph and a radio, and we've also got the earpiece. It's a very unusual little device. The design as well as the features that it packs in such a small space, and those features are an open reel mono tape recorder and a 45 RPM 7-inch record player, it plays those in mono as well, and an AM radio. The design is certainly different. I've never seen a portable reel-to-reel tape recorder in a round metal caked-in type box, and the lid is held down by this catch on the side and hinged at the back, and opening it up feels a little bit like opening a novelty lunchbox. Now just because no one's been in here, it doesn't guarantee that this thing is going to work. Of course it's sat around for a very long time, so perhaps we could have belts in here that have perished, capacitors that have leaked all over the circuit board if there is even a circuit board, so there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I just hope it works enough so that I can demonstrate it to you, but it isn't the kind of thing that I'd plan on using on a regular basis. After all, it's just a mono 45 RPM record player, a mono tape recorder and an AM radio. All things that I've got other versions of that would work better than this. Anyway, there's the tuning control for the radio. We've got a speaker on the left which will go through that grill in the top lid if you want to operate it with the lid closed, and if you do close that lid you can still get to those buttons along the bottom because there's a cutout in the lid which lets you just reach inside there. On the right we've got a recording level indicator. Notice there's a few inputs there and outputs. We've got earphone, microphone on the left. There's a bit of a mystery switch there which I'll figure out later on. A volume control, buttons along the bottom of course for the transport controls. Notice there's no fast forward on there. If we look at the side of it, we've got the handle, of course, for carrying it, as well as another microphone socket there if you don't fancy using the one on the top, if you've got the lid closed, for example. And then on the right-hand side here, that's where the aerial goes in to make the radio work. So let's put that in there first of all. That should be the easiest thing to test out. And it fits in there a bit like a key. You put it in at an angle and then twist it around, and there's a spring-loaded mechanism which pushes it back out and locks it in place. Let's flip this over and we'll put some batteries in here. Now when you've played around with a lot of old tech from say the 50s, 60s and 70s, you start to get a feel of what fits in what decade, and this one just seems a little bit weird for something from the 1960s. I'd expect it to have quite a bit more plastic in it than this. This all metal construction is just a little bit unusual. Perhaps this Answer company was an off-brand, maybe they didn't have access to plastic the same way that some other companies did. But anyway, let's put the 3 D cells in here. Now as you can see they go in those clamps that are on the hinged door, and they don't feel very firmly clamped in there. Of course D cells do have a bit of weight to them. I'd imagine they'd just fall into there if I tipped it upside down, so I'll tip it from the side and hopefully we'll be okay. I think once it's closed up it'll be fine. Right, let's open it up again and see if we can get this radio going, and that will show us whether there's any life in this machine at all. I thought that switch might turn it on, or the volume control, but no, it's rather more obvious than that. Press play and the radio plays. Now, I won't be able to get any decent reception in here. I never can in this room due to the amount of electrical interference from things like Wi-Fi. However, it's great to know that there is life in this machine. And I've noticed that if you remove the aerial and then press play, then the tape mechanism operates. It's the insertion of the aerial into the side which tells it that you want to use the radio. So because of its unconventional way of operating, I've decided to have a good look through the manual on this one so I don't miss anything. For example, if you want to play a tape, you put the tape on the right-hand reel and it plays across to the left-hand one, which is back to front from what I'm used to with other machines. You can record off the record player and you can record off the radio with this as well, and you can also mix your recordings. That's what the switch on the left is for. If you plug a microphone into it, you can record the radio and your voice at the same time onto the tape. And notice it says here that the radio is for BC band only. Now that is a terminology I was unfamiliar with until I've looked it up, and apparently BC stood for broadcast. It's the frequencies we more commonly refer to nowadays as AM or medium wave. But up to some point in the 1960s, you could also have called them BC. So now that I've read those instructions, I've got a much better grasp as to how this thing is supposed to work, and I now know that I don't need to flip that switch on the left-hand side unless I plan on recording my karaoke session where I'm singing along to a record. Now I've noticed they've got this addendum, which indicates that perhaps they had a bit of an issue with this machine. It tells you to keep that left-hand spool clean on the outside because it's a friction drive mechanism, and of course, if that got greasy, then it wouldn't work properly. But perhaps they had a bit of a problem with that. It does indicate that maybe that was a weak area. Let's just have a look inside here. Now, the way this works, the smaller rubber wheel at the top right, that is on a drive shaft, which goes down into the motor below. The larger rubber wheel pushes up against that drive shaft and also against the reel on the left hand side, and that's how it's driven round through friction. But notice there's a problem. On that larger rubber wheel there's a mark on the side. That's an indentation, and that has been caused because this thing has been sat in its box for over 50 years, during which time that has been resting up against that drive shaft and it's pushed a dint into it, and that could cause us a bit of a problem later on. We'll find out in a moment. I'm going to put some tape into this. I'm going to clean off these tape heads first of all with some isopropyl alcohol, and notice how the tape gets pushed between the tape head and that little bit of felt on the bottom there just to keep it against the head. I'll put the cover back on here and I'll thread this tape across. It goes from the right hand reel between this spring loaded cover against those tape heads and onto the reel on the left hand side. Okay, so the threading job isn't the tidiest, but it's just to test it out. And a quick tap to the side. It is working, but it's making a bit of a noise every time that indentation hits against that drive shaft. But we'll give it a go. We'll plug a microphone in here. We've got a choice of two different mic sockets. Use the one on the top if the cover's open, the one on the side if the cover's closed, but they do the same function. And to get it to record, you just press record. So let's try it out. Hello, just testing. Good. Right, so what we've got here, I don't know if you can see there in the recording level indicator, that's my voice moving the needle there. So with any luck we are actually recording something. Let's rewind and have a listen. Hello, just testing. Good. Right, so here, I don't know if you can see there in the recording level indicator, that's my voice moving the needle there. So, with any luck we are actually recording something. Let's rewind and have a listen. Okay, clearly a lot of problems there, but it is working to a degree, so you kind of get the idea. Let's try playing a 45 RPM record on this. So to do that, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You put this platter on. Now if you want, you can remove the tape from the machine if you were just playing a record and put it into the top of the spindle. However, if you want to record a record at the same time you're playing it, you leave the tape in place. Now the tone arm, you can see here it's got a little mini jack on one end, and that's how it's attached to the machine. And then the other end, well, of course we've got to remove this cover that protects it while it's in transit, and it's just a very simple matter of plugging it into that socket There's nothing more complicated than that. So once that's in place, I'm looking around the room trying to find a 45 RPM 7-inch record. I've only got a few test ones somewhere. I can't remember where I've put them, so I've just got this one out of its frame on the wall. I'm going to put this one in the top. Hopefully I won't damage this, but we'll find out. Although I don't think I need to worry about copyright if I do find those other records, because I doubt that YouTube will be able to identify what this machine was playing. Yeah, so that's no use at all. It turns out the machine is severely lacking in power, in torque, the ability to spin that wheel around. And perhaps it's to do with that rubber wheel in the middle. I also think it could be something to do with the motor. But I'm going to take both these rubber wheels out to see if there's anything I can do here to make it run a little bit better. The small one has to come out first, and then you can remove the split pin off the larger one. And then, being careful not to lose that as well, I can now remove the larger of the two wheels. And we'll see if there's anything we can do just to smooth out this dint a little bit. Now, if this was a common machine, you'd just go and get a replacement one of these. But if you couldn't do that, you might want to get the rubber redone. There are people who do that. However, I'm going to try something a little bit simpler here. I'm going to put it into a cup of hot water. Well, I'll get some of the hot water in the cup anyway. You can see why I'm not a barista. But while that's sitting in there, hopefully softening up, maybe getting its shape back, I just want to do something else. Since we've gone outside, let's try that radio without all the Wi-Fi interference that I was suffering from before, just to see if it does still work as it was supposed to.
This way. Well, trying to keep the tradition that we've done over the last few finals that we'll have got to. We drove to Istanbul, Rome and Paris. Obviously Wembley was easy.
Yeah, so that works fine. Now, the hot water thing, yes, I could have done that in the house. However, the lighting in the kitchen's a bit hopeless. That's why I did it outside. Now, throughout the day, I keep replacing the hot water in that cup every half an hour or so. So whilst that's going on, let's just have a look at the rest of this, because I've got a feeling that maybe it needs a bit of lubrication here. After all, it's been sat around for a very long time. Any oil and things that were in there will have hardened up. So it's just a matter of me just going through, finding all the moving parts that should move freely and just putting a bit of oil on those. Let's just take the top off this as well and have a look inside it properly, just to see if there's anything else in here that I can do to hopefully make it function a bit smoother. So I had a good dig around inside here and made sure all the mechanical parts of it were functioning as best as I could make them. Of course, the electronics, now that's going to be another issue. I'm quite sure quite a few of those capacitors are well past their sell-by date, and this thing would benefit from a few of those being replaced. It would no doubt increase the volume for one thing. I noticed it was a little bit quiet. But really, I just want to try this thing out and get it up and running. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now let's go back to that rubber roller and see if the hot water has improved it at all. And looking at this, I don't think it has. It doesn't seem to have made any difference whatsoever. Now, I did keep replacing that hot water for another couple of hours, but it really didn't change anything. So I think I'm going to have to give the hot water up as a bad job and try a different approach and use some rubber roller restorer. Now, this stuff is supposed to provide a bit more tackiness to old rubber. Sometimes it hardens up and therefore slips on things. Use some of this stuff and it just takes the surface off a little bit and brings it down to a level where the rubber has a bit more grip. You've got to be careful, of course, not to rub the surface off too far so the rubber doesn't have enough dimensions anymore to touch the thing it should have done. And also, of course, you don't want to leave flat edges on it. But even after messing around as best as I could with this, that dint goes quite deep into here, and I haven't really managed to get it to function any better than we saw before. But I'll put a record on this again and I'll just show you what it plays like now without the tape in place. I also managed to find that 45 RPM adapter in the bottom of that nice handbag earlier on, so I've put that on this record and we'll just have another quick listen. Yeah, so I think we could call that fix an unmitigated failure, but before we pack it all away, let's just try recording off a record. Before giving it up as a bad job, I thought I'd just try a couple more things to see if they'll improve it at all. This one with the elastic band didn't. It created too much grip and that meant it wouldn't spin at all. But then that made me realise what one of the other problems was, and I set about fixing that, and it did improve things slightly.
Okay, so I've got it running a little bit better than it was before. To do this, I've taken those wheels off, I've shaved the large wheel down past the point to which the dint was on it using an electric drill and some sandpaper, and then I've put some heat shrink tubing on, and that is there to help it with grip because the larger wheel was slipping on it. So it now works better as a tape recorder. However, it doesn't help it as a record player because the modifications I've done means that it now runs too quickly.
Now, despite it not working perfectly, I've got to say I'm happy with what I've been able to do, because in the end I could demonstrate all the various features of this machine. Even if it was working perfectly though, it definitely wouldn't be the best device at performing any of these functions. Now, I just want to cover a few of the idiosyncrasies of this machine as an open reel tape recorder of the era. Portable devices like this would commonly use a tape like this. This is a 3-inch tape. There are a number of different portable open reel recorders that would use a tape of this size. As well as 3-inch, there are a number of different sizes, 3, 5, 7, 10.5 being the most common ones. The tapes on this machine, well, if you measure it in inches, it doesn't quite fit. It's sort of 3 and a bit, and the reason for that is because it's a Japanese one, so it's going to use the metric system. And if we have a look at the other side of the tape, we find out that this reel is 85mm across. And I should have spotted that earlier because it's actually written on the reel itself. But that's not the only unusual thing about it. The spools have a small cutout hole on either side, and this is what keeps it in position on the platter. There's a similarly raised section on there which locates in that hole and keeps the reel in position. Now, on a normal reel-to-reel machine, the reels, the centre of the spindle has a 3-point star, and the reel just goes over there and gets held in position that way. So if you put a normal reel on this, it just spins freely. You can't use it on this machine. And the main thing, of course, is that the tape runs in the opposite direction. On a normal machine, it goes from the left reel to the right one. On this, it goes in the other direction. So if you do record something on this particular machine, the only place you're going to be able to play it back again is off this machine, which is such a strange way to do things. After all, the standards for reel-to-reel tape recorders have effectively been agreed upon for years before this thing hit the market. Now, as well as its unusual operation, this thing does have that slightly unusual construction, as well as the round shape. This heavy reliance on metal. It does have a few bits of plastic here and there on the feet and on the plastic window on the top, and of course the buttons. But just the amount of metal on this makes me feel that it isn't really a late 60s device. I date this one at about 60 or 61 if I had to put a particular date on it, but even then it's a little bit unusual. So I was trying to figure out when exactly this thing was made. So I went online and tried to do some research. Now, if you look into this, you'll find the ATR 102 quite easily because quite a few people have got hold of one of these. It seems like at some point someone's found a container full of these things and they've been offloading them on eBay over a period of years. So collectors of unusual technology, people like me, have picked these up, and generally people have said it's from the mid-1960s. Some people have narrowed that down to 1965. I'm not quite convinced by that. It just seems a little bit strange. So I started doing more research, looking into the books on Google. Now, I did manage to find it in this document here from 1967. Unfortunately, it's one of those ones that you can't read the whole thing. You can just see a little snippet out of, but you can see it just about at the top there, the ATR 102, and it's mentioned next to a pretty phonograph. Now, this document was from 1967, and it appears that perhaps that's when it came out, according to this document, or maybe this is a later document referring to the item coming out a few years earlier. Still not too sure of the exact date. Now, the other device mentioned there, the pretty phonograph, well, there's a chap on YouTube who's got one of those, made by the same company, as you can see, Answer. That's got a more conventional plastic construction. It's a small record player. So this Answer company definitely seems to have been on the scene during the mid to late 1960s, although this particular device just doesn't look like something from that period. If it had been out then, it should really have had a lot more plastic on it than this design does. In fact, let's just compare it against some of its contemporaries. In 1965, Billboard did a roundup of the various tape recorders that were available at the time, and they included various models for the home, but they also had a section on the battery recorders. So remember, this is 1965, approximately the same time my machine came to market, and things looked a lot different. Here's an example. I've got a very similar model to this one, and here it is. This is like night and day compared to the answer machine. All plastic construction using those standard 3-inch reels. And you've got to bear in mind, before this came to market in the early 60s, Philips had already launched their compact cassette. So these kind of things were sort of going out a little bit by the time this came out, and this is towards the latter part of the 60s. But yeah, all plastic, nothing like that all metal body of the answer. Now, when I'd had it open earlier on, I'd looked around the inside, trying to find a date stamp somewhere. Sometimes they're on the side of the motor. If this thing had had chips in it, they would have been on there as well. But there was nothing like that. The only thing in there was a Made in Japan sticker. But I do have one thing that I can go off, this design patent number. This will tell me when the design patent was applied for and granted. So type that number into the Japanese website, and there it is. You can see that this is the same device. Just do a close-up there. Yep, that's definitely the answer, ATR 102. Okay, so a quick check at the top of the document should reveal the dates, and it shows that this design patent was issued on the 30th of July 39. Okay, that must be a typo. We'll have a look over on the other dates. It shows that it was registered on the 17th of April 39. Okay, and it was applied for on the 15th of July 37. Well, this is getting worse. So what's going on here then? Right, so could it have been possible for a design for a portable tape recorder to have been drawn up in 1937? Well, you can find plenty of examples of products being imagined many years before they came to market. For example, the flat-screen televisions in Things to Come, Star Trek's communicators, and 2001's tablets. There are videos of Arthur C. Clarke from the 1960s giving a pretty accurate description of the future of personal computing and the World Wide Web. But could someone have predicted a portable tape recorder in 1937? Well, in theory, yes, because tape recorders existed before then. This is the Marconi tape recorder at the BBC in 1932. Now, this recorded onto flat steel tape that was wound up in a spool, much like the tape you get on a tape measure, for example. Now, it ran at 60 inches per second, and no one could be in the same room as this thing, because if that tape flew off, it'd chop your arm off. However, just 3 years later, 1935, this thing turns up on the scene. This is the first magnetic tape recorder that records onto plastic tape. This is the Magnetophone K1 from AEG, and it made its debut at the Berlin Radio Show in 1935. So in theory, our Japanese guy could have read about this and thought, I bet they're able to make those smaller in the future. After all, everything eventually ends up getting smaller. So let me draw up a design of a small one, put it inside a cake tin, and then I've got the design patent on it in case ever I'm able to develop that in the future. After all, at this point, he didn't have to specify how it worked. It was just a design. Okay, now that would be a cool story, but there's one thing that doesn't ring true. Why would a company in the 1960s dig up a 30-year-old design to base their products on? Perhaps it might have been a way to save money. I don't really know how the Japanese patent system works. But then again, it's also not unheard of for an old design to resurface many years later. But there's something just not quite right about this story. How would the 1937 guy know that the 1960s machine would need these exact buttons and sockets? Surely his design would have just looked like a smaller magnetophone. He wouldn't know about things like mini-jack sockets for the mic and earpiece and the recording level indicator. Okay, so how about we look at this in a different direction? Someone from the 1960s travels back in time to the 1930s and submits the design for a portable reel-to-reel tape recorder with the Patents Office, so they can then go back to the 1960s and collect royalties off all the manufacturers of portable tape recorders of that era, who they can now claim have copied their original design. It's that same old scam again, the time-travelling tape recorder patent heist, and that would explain the almost perfect match between the 1930s drawing and that 1960s machine. There is, however, just one more possibility, and that's that the Japanese Patent Office were using the Japanese date system, which is based around the reign of the emperors. So if you include the word before the date, it says Showa. So the ATR 102 was actually designed in Showa 37, which is 1962. Yes, I'm afraid it's the least enticing of the three options, but it's the most accurate one. And I hope you didn't mind the Shaggy Dog story, but it's just a way to include a bit of tape recorder history. But that date explains a lot, because this is really an early 60s design, but by the mid-1960s it would already have looked out of date, because things moved pretty quickly in the 60s as far as tech was concerned. Just think, 10 years before this came out, the first portable reel-to-reel recorders were in something the size of a suitcase. But then by 1963, Philips had brought out their compact cassette recorder. So yeah, you can understand why this product didn't sell at the time, and no doubt that's why there's a container somewhere full of these that someone's now knocking out on eBay. But still, it isn't without its charms. It is an unusual device, and I hope you've enjoyed having a look at it here today. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.